Shout out to the boy Caramello. Shout out to the boy Caramello. Yo, man, we've been getting to it recently. Brazil de Paburg. Yo, we've been getting into it in relation to the antiquity of the mound builders. We've been just diving in deep in relation to the Toltecs, Nahuatl, Codex Chimapapaca, Ixlioxochil. We going in right now, y'all. And if you ain't seen the recent Hue Hue Tlapalan video, yo, this one's gonna be a backup. We coming back with it again, diving into Hue Hue Tlapalan. So first thing we're gonna be jumping into is going to be this Science of Man journal of the Royal Anthropological Society in 1903. And this is going to be found on page 61. It came out in 1903, y'all. And we're just going to be diving into it, understanding, getting a better understanding, catching some good gems here and there. So we're starting off over here on this right side, under extracts from recent literature and from exchanges. Articles in the American Antiquarium say that the ancestors of the American indigenes were migrants from other lands after the one half of North America up to Philadelphia and St. Louis was covered with ice. Uh-oh. There it is. And from then increased in civilization until in Yucatan alone there were 51 cities. So they came from where? Uh-oh, up north, huh? Until they moved where? Down south. Why? Because of the ice. This civilization at its acme about 10,000 years ago, judged by the glacial recession of about 12 miles in 100 years. Human bones with those of mastodons and primitive bisons found at Kemswick, Missouri. Where? Mastodons? In Missouri, where flint and other arrowheads were found. These were deposited while an ice sheet covered those parts during these times. As the ice retreated, the migrants came in from Central America. Others still later crossed Bering Straits from Asia through Kamchatka. Some was coming, what they say, but people was already here. The more recent history began in 544 AD. They try and throw some chronology in there to try and make it work for them. When the Toltecs were 50 miles west of the city of Mexico, and there continued until 648. They came from a place called where? Hue Hue Tlapalan. It was northwest of the river Gila. They left there before the Chichimecs took possession of it 100 years afterwards. Who are the Chichimecs? The Chichimecs are known as the savages, the barbarians, the people who came in and just really, caused a whole bunch of catastrophe problems. And then held it for 500 years. Before that, they lived at Amake Makan, which was far to the north. They joined the Toltecs in Mexico in 1170 AD. The Nahuatl, what do they got to say? They got the Nahuatlaks came there from the north in 1196 AD. The Aztecs dwelt in Aztlan, north of the Gulf of California. Ooh, watch out now. In 1160 AD. And they reached Zampanco in the Mexican Valley in 1216. They were settled around the country of Las Casas Grandes in 1245 AD. And they arrived in Chapultepec in 1325. They built a great temple in Mexico. It was first made of wood and afterwards of stone. The ancestors of the above tribes were originally a people of Korea in Asia. Okay, so dodge the hijack, watch out. The ancestors, what they saying, of which Asia? This is Asia. This is Asia Major. What you talking about? First to rise out of the depths of the ocean, Luis Agassiz, out of the depths of the sea, America. Harvard geologist. They undertook a journey or voyage lasting 9 weeks. They set by the northeast of America. Their countrymen had communicated with America from the second year of the dynasty of Sin, the king of China. Okay, so you got to watch out with here because we already went through how Hui Shin of the Shi dynasty was over here long before we talking about BC. So if they even talking about any kind of connection with Asia in the first place, this ain't even the first time, because we was already in contact with Hui Shin when they was calling America Fusang. Go back, check out the Fusang episodes I done did. A copper eagle and a man were found in the Etowah Mound in Georgia. That's right, a copper eagle and man, but it wasn't a man. It was a pose, a copper pose, just like that of what we found in relation to Queen Khalifa. The same pose as Palenque or Talinque. Watch out, man. Okay. A runic inscription found, Norway, Scandinavians in America. Of course, they bringing that through. But just the aspect that we got Hue Hue Tlapalan there. Okay, going on to the next one. Yep. This one came out in 1866, y'all. Okay, so you can already see Hue Hue right there. This is pretty cool, though. I wanted to show y'all this one. This says the Kekip Seso Ators, or ancient sacrificial stone of the Northwest tribes. North where? Northwest. Northwest. Looking like some Arabic in this bad boy. Looking like some Hebrew symbols up. Look at that. Look at that. Turn it sideways. That's Hebrew all day. You got the crescent. Watch out, man. Look at these symbols. Okay, it says a relic of the mound builders found at Red Deer River in Alberta District, Northwest Territory, May 10th, 1882. Okay, let's get into it. Government and interpreter of the Blackfeet Indians. So ethnological studies, tradition, language, and architectural remains furnish data by which to trace the migration of ancient peoples. It is now an established fact. Watch out with we gonna just make it an established fact. Admitted by the most eminent ethnologists of America that the Hue Hue Tlapalan, or the primitive habitation of the ancient Toltecs, was situated in the far west, and that the whole of the Nahua tribes were one of the primitive races that peopled the Northwest at a remote pyramid. Let's keep going. It is not improbable that the Nahuas of old, while few in number, arrived at our northwestern coast. Oh no, watch out, here they go again. Where they found a home until they became a tribe of considerable proportion. They always gotta say they came from somewhere else. Why? Because they can't, they have to say that because they're still in the belief that the old world is over there. Thousands of their newly explored tumuli in Oregon and British Columbia speak more of a permanent sojourn than a migratory residence. Crossing the watershed between the sources of the Columbia and Missouri rivers, a large portion of the tribe found its way to the Mississippi and Ohio valleys, where, under the name of the mound-building people, they laid the foundation of a widespread empire. So again, dodge the hijacked in relation to them traveling all that way to finally making it to the Mississippi and the Ohio valleys, where they then formulated everything. Dodge the hijack. The remainder of the Nahuals, instead of crossing the mountains, migrated southward into Utah, establishing a civilization the remains of which are seen all over the San Juan Valley of the cliff dwellers which abound in that region. An ancient site of the western branch of the mound builders appears to have been the headwaters of the Missouri River, whence they spread themselves north as far as the South Saskatchewan and its tributaries, establishing numerous colonies along the eastern base of the mountains and away south to the headwaters of the Rio Grande by the South Pass of the Rockies. The scattered remains of mound builders' works in the Northwest Territory are connected by a similar chain of works at the James River in northern Dakota with the great artery of the Missouri mounds, and show more of a migratory movement than of a fixed residence. Why was they migrating? See, this is what they talking about. They don't, like on this one here, they not even giving account that we got volcanoes blowing off. We got ice sheets coming all the way down to the St. Louis. I mean, past the Canadian and United States border of modern times. Like, this is serious, bro. You got ice sheets right here in America. You know how cold it is, bro? Ain't nobody staying up here. They moving south. The scattered remains. Okay, yep. The most important of these ancient relics of the past are principally found in the Alberta district, close to the international boundaries, amongst which the more northern works are the defense works of Blackfoot Crossing, the ruins at the Kanansi village, the Omosina pictured rocks, and graded mound of the third Napa and Bow River, the tumuli of the Red Deer River, the walled city of the dead, and the inland lake of the Big Sandy Hill on the south, Saskatchewan, and the sacerdotes, or sacrificial stones of the country, to describe one of which is the object of the present paper. Let's see what we got. See what they talking about. Let's see what they talking about. The recorded traditions of the ancient civilized nations of the Pacific states corroborated to some extent the tradition of the Indian tribes of the Northwest. The Kamuko of the Quiche mourn over a portion of their people whom they left in northern Toulon. The Popovu, speaking of the cultus of the morning star, amongst the ancient Toltecs or Nahuals, states that they were drawing blood from their own bodies and offering it to their stone god Tohil, whose worship they first received when inhabiting the north. The Napaz tradition says that in the third sun, Natose, of the age of the earth, in the days of the bull of the Nile, the third Napa of the Choquitapia, or the plain people, when returning from the great river of the south, caused it to be erected in the sacred land of the Napaz, the Alberta district, upon certain high hills of the country, 7 Sesoators, or sacrificial stones, 7 for religious services amongst his people. What we talking about that we can relate to 7? If you've been digging with me in the Brasil de Baburg, when we talking about those 7 mountains, it's always 7. The religious idea in man, whether observed in the darkest heathenism or partially enlightened civilization, has always associated a place of worship with condition of elevated in isolation. These high places of worship of the Nagas tradition were the ever-open sanctuaries of the migratory people, at whose shrines the worshippers was himself first victim and sacrifice in the rites, at the point of the belief of an early age not entirely forgotten by the remnant of the race whose remains of an ancient works seem to sustain the claim of our Indian traditional lore. Now, what's so amazing is, even if they're talking about the migration, the migratory people, why was they migrating? Because they wasn't staying in the cold, bruh. They was moving with the sun. They adored the sun, the life giver of all. A constant tradition of the Choquitapia, or Blackfeet Indians. Sounds a lot like Cahokia, Choquitapia. Kind of similar in a sense. A powerful tribe of remote Nahual parentage, inhabiting at the present day the southern part of the Northwest Territory of the Dominion of Canada, has always pointed to a high hill situated on the south side of the Red Deer River, opposite to Hand Hill, 2 miles east of the Broken Knife Ridge, as the site of one of those ancient cities of the bygone days of the primitive race. Now jumping into New Light on American Archaeology by Lewis Edward Hills. We're going to be on page 94. You can see it right here already. I'm going to be jumping into this, see what we got. I'm going to go up a little bit, see what we're doing. Now, when we come in, this one in here is going to be about, it's going to be a little bit Mormon talk in here. But still, you know, the Mormons believe this is the true old world. So I'm digging it. Not necessarily on the religious aspect, but I'm digging what they talking about. They fall in line. All of these tribes are said to have come from the unknown Aztlan, their early home. The question of its locality has been as much a subject of controversy as the location of Hue Hue Tlapalan, since in fact the question is possibly one and the same. For the Nahual-speaking people who migrated into Mexico, and where did they come from? The north. And what part of the north? The Ohio-Mississippi Valley. At intervals. Why intervals? Because we had all kinds of catastrophes happening here. When the volcanoes explode, when the ice formulates, when the earth cooled down, when the earth or the local region area was flooded with mud floods from these volcanoes and earthquakes and massive convulsions of earth, man. It says, for the Nahual-speaking people who migrated into Mexico at intervals extending over a period of 1,000 years, probably more than likely more, must have had a common origin. Aztlan is described by Duran as a most attractive land, and the presumption is that the Nahuals were forcibly driven from their fair heritage by the gradual encroachments of their enemies. So now you got two different factors in play. You got natural phenomena that's occurring, natural cycles, things that the earth constantly does, mama bear, mother earth, okay? And then you got other people that's, hey man, this ice is coming, we got to get up out of here, we losing our lands, we can't do nothing about it, we got to come down here, y'all ain't trying to show us love? Nope, well, let's fight, okay? The account of this delightful country given by Coatl to the elder Montezuma is as follows, quote, "Our fathers dwelt in that happy and prosperous place which they called Atzlan, which means whiteness. In this place there is a great mountain in the middle of the water, which is called Culhuacan, because it has the point somewhat turned over toward the bottom. And for this cause it is called Culhuacan, which means crooked mountain. In this mountain were some openings or caves or hollows where our fathers and ancestors dwelt for many years." Notice that particularly there were caves where their fathers and ancestors dwelt for many years. This Indian's account is evidence, which is very important, for he is describing the city of Nephi and the waters of Mormon. So you see, they bringing it back into the Mormon aspect. But either way, Aztlan, okay? All right, so we got the cities of Aztlan, Tulan. Watch out now, okay? Now here we go in relation again, the seven caves, the 7 cities of Cibola, the 7 volcanoes in Brasil de Paborg's work. So it says, and we already know who's translating the Popol Vuh as Brasil de Paborg. So here we go. In the Popol Vuh, a Quechua or Mayan document, it refers to the 4 brothers at the death of their father, going to Tulan, Zuiva, or the place of the 7 caves, native races. Okay, now why I'm pointing this out is because what we learn in Brasil de Paborg's work in relation to those 4 brothers. Volcano talk. The remaining chapters in the division have also been translated in substance. In them are related the adventures of Balaam, Kitze, Balaam, Agab, Mahukuta, and Iki, Balaam, Balaam. We just went over this in part 4. In Origins of Civilization, go back. The founders of the Quechua nations, the people multiplied greatly in a region called the East, and migrated in search of the gods of Tulan, Zuiva, the 7 caves. Oh man, watch out, 7 caves. So now we're going to be jumping into this one, which is fire and ice. And let's see where we can find this Hue Hue Tlapalan. I think I was reading on this one a bit. Okay, so we in this Fire and Ice of the Third Age by Michael James. It's we're gonna be going over just a little bit here. Again, picking out the babies, understanding what Hue Hue Tlapalan is. It's kind of been, not been really put out there as far as understanding one of the old names for North America. But we're going to start right here. So it says, Ignatius Donnelly's book, Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, was written in 1882, okay? It was written after the ancient evolution theory had taken hold. Donnelly's book contains a wealth of information, but many of his conclusions are wrong. This is because he doesn't believe in a worldwide flood, okay? I don't either. Leading him to believe the African people didn't come from Noah. Oh, dodge the hijack. Since he doesn't believe, because we ain't even talking about Africa in the first place, since he doesn't believe in the worldwide flood, he also has many other errors as to where the people of the world came from and how ancient the people's roots are. We will talk about Atlantis in the next chapter, blase, blase. However, the book is full of information if one sorts out the obvious errors. See, pulling out the gems, baby. One gem in his book is an incredible and seemingly accurate account of the people who founded the Toltec Empire. Donnelly says predecessors to the Aztecs. We read on pages 103 and 104 about the flood and some individual migration. Donnelly writes, "It is found in the histories of the Toltec that this age and the first world, as they call it, lasted 1,716 years, that men were destroyed by tremendous rains and lightning from the sky, and even all the land, without the exception of anything in the highest mountains, were covered up and submerged in waters 15 cubits. And here they added other fables of how men came to multiply from the few who escaped from the destruction in a Toptipit locale, that this word nearly signifies a closed chest. And how, after men had multiplied, they erected a very high Zakuali, which is today a tower of great height, in order to take refuge in it, and should be second. In it, should the second world be destroyed. What they talking about? Second world? What that mean? Second age? How many ages we done been through? What they talking about? Kali Yugas? Presently, their languages were confused, and not being able to understand each other, they went to different parts of the earth. How many different dialects of languages was found here in America? Wasn't it over like 200? The Toltecs, consisting of 7 friends with their wives, who understood the same language, came to these parts, having first passed great land and seas, having lived in caves, and having endured great hardships. In order to reach this land, they wandered 104 years through different parts of the world before they reached Hue Hue Tlapalan. There's a hijack with the great parts of the world. We talking about America. How many different seas was in America at that time? You see what I'm saying? We still got seas today. What you mean? Right here in the landmass of America. Which was in Tipatro, 520 years after the flood. Ixtleotzochil, Relaciones, in Kingsboroughs. Okay? Okay? So Daja hijack, Hue Hue Tlapalan, one of them old America. Okay, so coming over here in regards to the book of the 10 Tribes of Israel by Barbara Ann, we're going to be jumping directly into it, okay? So it says here, let me see. Of a tradition respecting Quetzalcoatl, Humboldt observes, the Great Spirit, Tezcatlipoca, offered Quetzalcoatl a beverage, which in rendering him immortal inspired him with a taste for traveling, particularly with an irresistible desire of visiting a distant country, called by tradition Tlapalan. The resemblance of this name to that of Hue Hue Tlapalan, the country of the Toltecs, appears not to be accidental. Now, when they talking about a faraway distant country, bro, that doesn't mean he was way over there in Africa or India, like we just went over earlier. They could have been coming straight over from Cuba or Florida, bro, over to the Yucatan. That is very far from them. That is not something close, bro. But how can we conceive that this white man, Daja Hijack, priest of Tula, should have taken his direction, as we shall presently find, to the southeast towards the plains of Cholula, and then to the eastern coast of Mexico, in order to visit this northern country, whence his ancestors had issued, etc. Quetzalcoatl, in crossing the territory of Cholula, yielded to the entreaties of the inhabitants, who offered him the crown. He dwelt 20 years amongst them, taught them to cast metals, offered feasts of 8 days, and regulated the intercalculations of the Toltec year. He preached peace to men, and when they say Toltec year, what they mean by that, because we heard about how the great sages was convoked to Hue Hue Tlapalan to build the calendar in the first place, understanding the year, the time. He preached peace to man and would permit no offering to the divinity other than the first fruits of the harvest. Just give up your first fruits. That's it. Don't sacrifice. Okay. Another very remarkable tradition still exists among the Indians of Cholula, according to which the Great Pyramid was not originally destined to serve for the worship of Quetzalcoatl. What? Now everybody talking about it's about Quetzalcoatl, but it wasn't. It wasn't destined to serve for the worship of Quetzalcoatl. After my return to Europe on examining at Rome the manuscripts in the Vatican Library, I found that the same tradition was already recorded in a manuscript of Pedro de los Rios, a Dominican monk who, in 1560, copied on the very spot all the hieroglyphics he could procure. He adds, "This history reminds us of those ancient traditions of the East, which the Hebrews have recorded in their sacred books." So where did it originate? To prove further the high antiquity of the tradition, Rios observes that it was contained in a hymn which the Cholulans sung at their festivals, dancing around the Teocalli, and that this hymn began with the words Tulian, Hululae, 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 which are words belonging to no dialect at present known in Mexico. In every part of the globe on this side of the Cordilleras, as well as the Isle of Samothrace in the Asian Sea, fragments of primitive languages are preserved in religious rites. The size of the platform of the Pyramid of Cholula, on which I made a great number of astronomical observations, is 4,200,000 square meters. From it, the eye ranges over a magnificent prospect, etc. We view at the same time 3 mountains higher than Mont Blanc, 2 of which are still burning volcanoes. A small chapel surrounded with cypress and dedicated to the Virgin de los Remedios has succeeded to the temple of the god of the wind, etc. An ecclesiastic of the Indian race celebrates Mass every day on the top of this antique monument. In the time of Cortez, Cholula was considered a holy city. Nowhere existed a greater number of teocallis, of priests and religious orders. Tlamalacque. No spot displayed greater magnificence in the celebration of public worship, or more austerity in its penances and fasts. Similarities. They call the morning star after Quetzalcoatl. They say he took this name on occasion of his disappearance. With respect to the appellation of Mexi or Mazatli, the other name by which Quetzalcoatl was known among the Mexicans, it is very remarkable that it is precisely the same as the Hebrew word which signifies the anointed. Metzli, Metzli, the anointed. Mexi, the anointed. Mashi, Mashika, the anointed. The Virgin was represented in the Indian paintings of whom the great prophet should be born, and that his own people would reject and meditate evil against him and would put him to death. Sounding like the Bible, huh? Jesus. Jesus. According, he is represented in the paintings with his hands and feet tied to a tree. Oh no. The manner in which he has returned to life again and ascended to heaven was likewise painted. Oh no. The Dominican fathers said they have found these things among some Indians who inhabited the coasts of the South Seas, who stated that they had received the traditions from their ancestors. Okay? Baron Humboldt noticed the same in the following curious passage extracted from his work entitled American Monuments in Acosta's Natural History of the Indies, 28th chapter, especially on page 163. Cosas was chief of the 20 men who commanded fasting and confession, affirming that Bachab had been put to death. The Torquemada informs us that Quetzalcoatl had been in Yucatan and was there adorned. The interpreter of the Vatican Codex says in the following curious passage that the Mexicans had a tradition that he, Bachab, Quetzalcoatl is Bachab, died upon a tree, and he adds, according to their belief, for their sins of mankind. Oh no! Oh no! If more history, paintings, and monuments of Yucatan had been preserved, we should have been enabled to determine whether Bachab and Quetzalcoatl were two different names for the same Lord, who was worshipped alike by Yucatan and Mexico. The Chiapanese called the same Lord Votan, which signifies the heart of the people. Of Quetzalcoatl, they relate that he proceeded on his journey towards the Red Sea. The Red Sea, which Red Sea? The Red Sea over in California, the Vermilion, which is represented. When about to part from them, he desired them to restrain their grief and to expect his return, which would take place at the appointed time, according they expect him even to the present time. And when the Spaniards came to their country, they believed that it was he. And even in the year 1550, when the Capotecas revolted, they alleged as the cause of their insurrection the report of their God, who was to redeem them, had already come. Now, Cortez and Gomarra, in relating the horrors with which the Mexicans sustained during the last days of the siege, both mention that they consoled themselves in the last sufferings with the hopes of going to Quetzalcoatl, that even the enemies of the city of Cholula bound themselves to make pilgrimages to it. And this was on account of the great love which they felt towards him. For in truth, the dominion of Quetzalcoatl was sweet, and he exacted no service from them but easy and light things, instructing them in such as were virtuous, and prohibiting such as were wicked, evil, and injurious, teaching them likewise to abhor them. One and the same, reflections, copies. Hence, why do you think they had to burn everything over here? Why do you think they had to destroy all the documents over here? Especially the church. It was the church and the bishops and the priests that did it. Why? Because they knew they was about to lose their power. Because the truth is here. The old world is America. Hence it appears, continues Torquemada, that the Indians who celebrated human sacrifices did not so voluntarily, but from the great fear which they entertained of the devil on account of the threats which he held out to them, that he would destroy them, and sending bad seasons and many misfortunes upon them, except they duly performed the worship and service which they owed to him as a tribute and mark of vassalage, from the right which he pretended to have acquired over them many years before. They declared that he remained with them during the entire period of 20 years, at the expiration of which he departed, prosecuting his journey to the kingdom of Tlapalan, Hue Hue Tlapalan, North America. So, now jumping into this one is the De Original of the Indies by Philbert Dabry, and this one's in another language, so we gotta do some translating here. But let's see what's going down. Okay. So here we go. Stay among them in the Turanian colony. Turanian. Coming from the surroundings of the Caspian Sea. The first kingdom founded by Hue Hue and whose capital was Culhuacan was called, according to traditions, Hue Hue Tlapalan, in memory of the lost homeland and its inhabitants, Tahe, the great Hue, or Hue Hue, Tio, Culhuacan, or Tio. Culhuacan is also named Hue Culhuacan, according to Ixtlaochil, the tribes that invaded Anahuac at the end of the 6th century under the orders of the nebulous White Serpent, were tribes that had rebelled against the king of Hue Hue Tlapalan, whose capital was Hue Hue Salak. You ever heard of that one? The capital of Salak. Zalak. The first city that Mixcoatl built was Hue Hue Tocan. The first city that Mixcoatl built was Hue Hue Tocan. Okay? And the king of Hue Hue Tlapalan, whose capital was Hue Hue Salak. It is likely that this was, at this time, the two distinct groups were formed, which are found in history under the names of Mexicas, Mexithians. Oh my, the Scythians? No way. Toltecs, Nahuals, Aztecs, Quichuas on one side, and Caris, Caribbeans, Colhuaques, Mayas, Aymaras on the other. Mexica, or Mexithians, or Scythians, is the ancient name of these people. Mec is the plural mark in Nahuatl and indicates filtration in Maya, or affiliation in Maya. Torquemada recounts that when the Tepanec chiefs presented themselves to the king of Teneyocan, they were recognized as Scythians, whose ancestors were illustrious for the nobility of their race as for their heroic deeds. These Scythians, as this author, came from Aztlan, Chicomostocar. In the work of Thevenot, printed in Paris in 1644, at the article Mexico, page 47, 63 plates from the Mexican manuscript found and published by Manuel Parchas, a knowledgeable English theologian, are attached. The first part of the manuscript relates to the annals of the empire, the foundation of the country, and the conquest of the Mexiti. This same name, which is found in a large number of oral or written traditions and which has been given to the Empire of Mexico, would be better suited to all of North America. America is Mexico. The name of Toltecs must have been given to the group of Mexicans after the foundation of Tula. Teca is the mark of the plural. Okay, so here we're in Ignatius Donnelly. You can see exactly what's going on. So let's go ahead and dive into this just real quick, because it says, this is directly from the book, right? So it says, from the distant east, from the fabulous Hue Hue Tlapalan, this mysterious person. Which mysterious person? Who are we talking about? Okay, so it says American evidences of intercourse with Europe or Atlantis. On the monuments, America is Atlantis, watch out. On the monuments of Central America, there are representations of bearded men. Yeah, of course. So, what's that mean? You think there's bearded men here that they had to come from somewhere else? How could the beardless American Indians have immigrated? Imagine a bearded race. Oh no, here they go. So, we gotta act like every single person that developed here in America didn't have a beard. Come on, man. All the traditions of the civilized races of Central America point to an Eastern origin. Okay, yeah, we know you want to try and hijack and bring someone else from another country to say that they helped develop America. We was already here. The leader and civilizer of the Nahua family was Quetzalcoatl. This is the legend respecting him. Okay, so again, they always bringing it back to Quetzalcoatl. From the distant east, from the fabulous Hue Hue Tlapalan, this mysterious person came to Tula and became a patron god and high priest of the ancestors of the Toltecs. He is described as having been a white man with strong formation of body, broad forehead, large eyes, and flowing beard. He wore a mitre on his head and was dressed in a long white robe reaching to his feet and covered with red crosses. Oh my gosh. In his hand, he held a sickle. A sickle? Why would he hold a sickle? Sounded like Santa Muerta in this thing, huh? His habits were ascetic. He never married, was most chaste and pure in life, and is said to have endured penance in a neighboring mountain, not for its effects upon himself, but as a warning to others. He condemned sacrifices except the fruits and flowers and was known to the god of peace, for when he addressed the subject of the war, he is reported to have stopped his ears with his fingers. North American antiquities. North American, not South, North American. Okay. What numberless ages does this suggest? How many centuries elapsed before man thought of cultivating Indian corn? How many more had spread over nearly 100 degrees of latitude and lost all resemblance to its original form? Maize. Beginning of civilization. In the animal kingdom, certain animals were domesticated by the Aborigines from so remote a period that scarcely any of their species, as in the case of the llama of Peru, were to be found in a state of unrestrained freedom at the advent of the Spaniards. The most ancient remains of man found in Europe are distinguished by a flattening of the tibia, and this peculiarity is found to be present in an exaggerated form in some of the American mounds. This also points to a high antiquity. So what they saying is the most ancient remains of man found in Europe are by flattening the tibia. But this is really still exaggerated form within the American mounds, showing that it originated here and then someone moved over there. Okay, was buried. Okay. None of the works, mounds, or enclosures are found on the lowest formed of the river terraces which mark the subsidence of the streams, and as there is no good reason why their builders should avoid erecting them on that terrace, while they raise them promiscuously on all others, it follows not unreasonably that this terrace has been formed since the works were erected. We have given some illustrations on showing the similarity between the works of the mound builders and those of the Stone and Bronze Age in Europe. The mound builders retreated southward towards Mexico, and probably arrived there sometime between AD 29 and AD 231 under the name of Nahuals. So who were our mound builders then? Doesn't seem like they were the Indians. I'm sorry. I mean, are we classifying Nahuals now as Indians? Were they Indians? I mean, they could be Indians, but are they Native Americans? Because we know that there's a big distinction between what is now known as Native Americans and Indians or Aborigines. Okay? They called this region they left in Mississippi Valley Hue Hue Tlapalan, the old red land, in allusion probably to the red clay soil of part of the country. Okay, so if Ignatius Donnelly was thinking that it was because of the red man, do you think he probably would have said it was the red man instead of the red clay? Probably so. But the fact here is that we know that the Mississippi Valley, the mound builders, the Atalans, the Kutans, the Allegans, the Nahuas came from the land known as Hue Hue Tlapalan. There ain't no mystery. There ain't no who were the mound builders. It's right. It was known. In the mounds, we find many works of copper, but none of bronze. This may indicate one of two things. Either the colonies which settled the Mississippi may have left Atlantis. Come on, man. Prior to the discovery of art of manufacturing bronze by mixing 1 part of tin with 9 parts of copper, or, which is more probable, the manufacture of the mound builders may have been made on the spot. Oh, that they are what? Made on the spot. Because what? They're from there? Or just maybe the aspect that they were before? It is known that the Mexicans possessed the art of manufacturing true bonds, and the intercourse which evidently existed between Mexico and the Mississippi Valley, as proved by the presence of implements of obsidian in the mounds of Ohio, renders it probable that the same commerce which brought them obsidian brought them also small quantities of tin and tin-hardened copper implements necessary for their sculptures. The proofs, then, of the connection of the mound builders with Atlantis are their race identity with the nations of Central America who possessed flood legends and whose traditions all point to an eastern oversea origin. Dodge the hijack. While the many evidences of their race identity with the ancient Peruvians indicate that they were part of one great movement of the human race, extending from the Andes to Lake Superior and, as I believe, from Atlantis to India. The similarity of their civilizations and their works of stone and bronze with the civilization of the Bronze Age in Europe, the presence of great truncated mounds, kindred to the pyramids of Central America, Mexico, Egypt, and India, the representation of tropical animals which point to an intercourse with the regions around the Gulf of Mexico, where the Atlanteans were colonized. The fact that the settlements of the mound builders were confined to the valley of the Mississippi and were apparently densest at the points where the population advancing up that stream would first reach high, healthy, and fertile lands. The hostile nations which attacked them came from the north. Now, didn't we already talk about this in a little bit of detail in relation to our Veil of Antiquity? Or was that a little bit earlier, which was Atala is America, when we go through Rafinesque's work, where he speaks of the Oghuzzians coming down and attacking the Atalans and the Kutans. Come on, let's get our overstanding right. I know you with me. If you ain't, go back and catch up. The hostile nations, could no longer hold the country, or when Atlantis sunk in the sea, they retreated in the direction whence they came and fell back upon their kindred races in Central America, as the Roman troops in Gaul and Britain drew southward upon the destruction of Rome. 7. The Natchez Indians, who were supposed to have been descended from the mound builders, kept a perpetual fire burning before an altar, watched by old men, who were a sort of priesthood, as in Europe. Watch out, Natchez. Watch out, Natchez. Number 8. If the tablet said to have been found in the mound near Davenport, Ireland is genuine, which appears probable, the mound builders must either have possessed an alphabet or have held intercourse with some people who did. See North Americans of Antiquity on page 38. This singular relic exhibits what appears to be a sacrificial mound with a fire upon it. Over it are the sun, moon, and stars, and above these a mass of hieroglyphs which bear some resemblance to the letters of European alphabets, and especially to that unknown alphabet which appears upon the inscribed bronze celt found near Rome. America is the true old world. For instance, one of the letters of the celt is this. You see this one here? This is what he's going over. I can't zoom in. It won't let me zoom in. I don't know why. What's up with this Google Books? On the Davenport tablet, we find this sign. On the celt, we have, on a tablet, this one. On the celt, we have, boom. And then on the tablet, boom. You see what I'm saying? Similarities, okay? Okay, so ancient America, in notes, Hue Hue Tlapalan on page 57, so let's go to page 57. Okay, so this is by John Baldwin, okay? Ancient America. It says, who were the mound builders? We ain't got to guess. Let's get to it. Who were the mound builders? This ancient people whose remains indicate unity in civilization must have been organized as a nation with a central administration which all recognized. They must have had a national name, but nobody can tell certainly what it was. We know. Okay? No record or tradition has been preserved unless its discovery of it can be made and a national designation found without clear explanation in the old books and traditions of Central America and applied to some country situated at a distance from that of the part of the continent in the northeast. From where? Central America. These old books and traditions mention Hue Hue Tlapalan as a distant, northeastern country from which the Nahuals and the Toltecs came to Mexico. So the Nahuals and the Toltecs came to Mexico. And Brazier de Baberg, who has translated one of the old books and given much attention to others, supposes the Toltecs and the mound builders to be the same people? Or did suppose that this previous an appearance of his Atlantic theory? But this point will be more fully considered when we come to the Central American antiquities. Some antiquaries suggest that the mound builders, here we go, y'all already know what's up, I've been talking about this, were people called Allegoi in old traditions of the Iroquois, which is the Allegoi. What is the Allegoi? The Allegoi is also the Allegons. That's why you got the Allegheny Mountains. Okay? But we have nothing to make this very probable. The Iroquois were somewhat superior to the other great family of barbarous Indians in organization for the business of fighting. Now, time out. I know a lot of people want to say, oh, these people come over here and they just want to talk down on these Indians. Yo, man, they trying to distinguish different types of people. There were savages. There were savages. There were rude tribes. It's not, but we can't generalize everybody on that. Right? To sit here and say, all the Native Americans were barbarous. All the Native Americans were savages. That's not right. That's not true. That's not right. There are some reasons for believing they came to the lake regions in the Ohio Valley much earlier than the Algonquin branch of the wild Indian race. Which race? Don't generalize. Which ones? Be specific. It is permissible at least to conjecture. Now we're getting to conjecture. If one feels inclined to do so, that it was the Iroquois migration from the northwest, or that of the great family to which the Iroquois family belonged, which expelled the mound builders from their border settlements, cut them off from the copper mines, and finally pushed them down the Mississippi. What are we talking about? Are we talking about the Ocoseans? Would this mean that the Algonquin or the Iroquois family, were the Iroquois part of the Ocoseans? What do we got going on? Okay, so we've actually read this before. A lot of this actually is within the Veil of Antiquity when we're going through R.S. Clymer's book right now as well. Okay, so now we're coming into Parkman Club papers by Parkman Club. Okay, so it says here, we're just going to jump up a little bit. I ain't trying to read all this, but we're going to start here at the top. This would indicate an American origin for the ancient peoples of the Old World, and would thus help us arrange the chronology of the New World. Okay, because why? The New World is the Old World. It's just new because y'all ain't been here for so long. It's been a long time. As yet, however, it rests largely upon the veracity, logical accuracy, and interpreting skill of a single man, and though the Egyptians themselves thought they had a Western origin. What you mean? Though the Egyptians themselves thought they had a Western origin. Why? Why would they think that? Because this is Egypt. This is the old Egypt. This is the original. Hue Hue Tlapalan. We hesitate to form theories based on statements of an enthusiast in opposition to the world's old beliefs, but it seems reasonably safe to infer that in remote prehistoric times, a large island in the Atlantic enabled the people of the two continents to have some intercourse. Dodge the hijack, okay? That an American race apparently influenced to some extent the oldest civilizations of the old world. Let's read that again. That an American race apparently influenced, to a large extent, the oldest civilizations of the old world. Yeah. Appreciate you, Parkman Club. Appreciate you keeping it real out here, bruh. Next in antiquity to the Mayas are the Nahual races. Next in antiquity to the Mayas are the Nahual races of Mexico, of whom the Toltecs and the Aztecs are best known. Okay, so who's before the Mayas? The Nahual races. And the Nahual races of Mexico come from where? Hue Hue Tlapalan. And where is Hue Hue Tlapalan? The Ohio and Mississippi Valley are mound builders. Correlation, let's go. Where they originally came from is unknown. We know, Parkman Club. We've been reading it. But the derivation of the name Atlantis from a Nahual root might mean they were colonists from the ancient and ill-fated island. Nope. Their records narrate long migrations prior to their final settlement in Mexico. Okay, Long migrations, what does that mean? What does that mean when you hear long migrations? Man, if I had to, with my family and my peoples, bro, if I had to walk or carry all of my goods with my animals and everything, okay, from the Ohio, let's just say we coming from Chicago, okay, now known as Chicago, all the way down to Texas, where I'm from. Boy, you know how long they gonna take me? Boy, y'all wildin'. That's long, okay? So don't make it seem as though, oh, they had to come across the world. We're not buying that no more. That is done. Okay? These are not sufficiently clear to be followed on the map. Nope, so stop with the conjecture. But from their long duration and variety of incident, they may have covered a large part of North America. Yeah, that's right. You're right on that one. Okay, because we got to think about all these forests was still like large, bro. They had all these animals that they was fighting, man. They had to be protected, bro. It's not just jumping on the road like today and getting where you need to get, man. Come on, man. The first fact that can be asserted with he said the first fact. Let's just say the first theory or overstanding that can be asserted with a reasonable degree of confidence. Yeah, okay, because you're saying a fact and then degree of confidence in the same reasonable don't make no sense. So the first theory that can be asserted with a reasonable degree of confidence is that the branch of the Nahuatl race called the Toltecs came into Mexico, probably from the northeast during the 5th or 6th century of the Christian era. Okay. That's cool, but we already know the chronology's jacked up. So if you're going with the chronology that's jacked up, probably well before. The country in which they came, they called Hue Hue Tlapalan, i.e. the Old Tlapalan, which itself means red land. This meaning suggests the possibility of their having given the country its name from our red-skinned natives. See? So again, you got Donnelly over here not talking about red-skinned native. He's actually talking about the soil that's red. And then you got Parkman Club over here now talking about the red-skinned natives. So you see how things can move to understanding to where one will grasp it if they can make sure to do so and call themselves red-skinned. No disrespect. But do you see how easy it is? And would perhaps add to the evidence that the Mississippi Valley was their former home. On the other hand, they have something of a brownish color themselves. Copper-colored tribes of America. And that color, and its various shades, seem to have prevailed over all the Western Hemisphere. So, unless they were of a particularly light shade, we must look further for corroborative evidence. Near Veracruz, where they would probably have landed, are sepulchral mounds similar to those of the Mississippi Valley and filled with pottery and arrowheads that are also similar to those found along the Mississippi. A tradition of the Toltecs says they came by land. Dodging all the hijacks. Ain't nobody come over no sea. They came by the land. But even if none of them came by water, the coast region of Veracruz might have been their camping ground. Might have. For years before they penetrated the interior and improved their civilization on the tableland and valleys about the inland lakes. See how they have to do that? They got to throw in their little conjecture so that they keep your mind focused on them coming outside of outside of America. North America, to be exact. Here they reached huge pyramids of earth. Yep. And guess what? Cahokia is the biggest one in all North America. Faced with stone or burned clay and surmounted with stone temples. Yup. These pyramids and religious proceedings that march to their summits to offer sacrifice are considered strong links to connect the Toltecs with the mound builders. And when they talking about sacrifice, does it always have to be, could they just not been bringing their fruits, their harvest? They always talk about sacrifice. Could be though. Ain't no way. Hey, that was the old world belief, right? Are considered strong links to connect the Toltecs with the mound builders. The pyramid of the Egyptian was a mausoleum. Oh, I hate this word. I'm not even going to say it. For the dead. But the truncated pyramid of the Toltec was his place of worship, and the solemn processions that swept up its steps to the horrible human sacrifices on its summit were watched with superstitious awe by the multitude of the square below. There is no tradition or parchment record of the mound builders to tell us how they worshipped. But we find here in the Mississippi Valley the same truncated pyramids with the broad graded pathway leading to their summits, the same terraces or tiers of steps at their sides. And in the sepulchral mounds, it is claimed, are evidences of cremation and possibly of human sacrifice. For in one large mound are discovered carefully buried and ornamented remains of one individual, and above and outside the tomb proper are found the scattered remnants of several others, probably his family and servants, as the undisturbed strata show they were not subsequent intrusive burials. As arrowheads of Mexican obsidian are found in the mounds even of Ohio and Wisconsin, there must have been some intercourse with the then inhabitants of Mexico. Yes, we've already gone through this. We got the overstanding. Okay, so we're going to be in this book called The Firelands Pioneer, and it was published in 1878. You'd never think you'd find stuff like this in a book that's named The Firelands Pioneer. But maybe when they're speaking of the fire lands, they're speaking of volcanoes. Okay, so it says the mystery of Atlantis. That's apparently this chapter here. Let's check it out from the beginning on this one, though. This one's kind of crazy. This might get a little long. But hey, man, I'm all about my knowledge. If you digging with me, hey, ride with me. If not, you can skip through to the next one. The Mystery of Atlantis, an address delivered at a quarterly meeting of the Firelands Historical Society held at Peru on the October 30th of 1878. Right on time, baby. We in October now. Let's go. 2 hemispheres and a dividing ocean. A world of civilized nations on one side and a world for ages unknown on the other. Perfect. Between them a tempestuous waste of water, 1,000 leagues from shore to shore and 2,000 fathoms from the heaven, heaving blue surface to the undisturbed ooze at the bottom. The history of the old world tells us of no time when these things were not so. The records of the new world we have not read, for we are only just studying their alphabet. Thousands of years, one by one, gilded from the shoreless sea of the future into the shoreless sea of the past. Time, never for an instant idle, changed things to be into things which had been. The nations assembled on the plains of Shinar attempted to build a tower high as the dome of the heavens, ignorantly failed, and were scattered to the 4 winds. Nineveh and Babylon were built in a fertile... Yeah, we dodging the hijack on that one. Thinking that old world over there. Columbus found naked savages on the islands where he landed. Savages greeted the colonists of Jamestown and Plymouth, but many degrees removed from savagery were the Incas of Peru, and the people who attempted to resist the cruel invasion of Cortez into the land of Anahuac. The fierce Spaniards found and destroyed a civilization of almost as high an order as their own. In the name of Christianity, the people who had wrought such works were not the roving red tribes of the northern woods and prairies. Not the same, y'all. Behind the civilizations of the Aztec period, before, there were older civilizations evidenced by such magnificent ruins and as antiquaries have visited Egypt and Assyria to see. They are in the mountains of Peru, the dense and tangled forests of Yucatan and Guatemala, and scattered all along the Mississippi Valley from the Gulf of Mexico, the true Fertile Crescent, to our own Blue Lakes. Here we go, talking about a little bit more. It is a subject of local interest to us, for not all the mysterious strangers who were Americans before we were, and before the Eries and the Hurons and the Iroquois waged their fierce wars along the shores of our lakes, dwelt so far away as Central America and Mexico's. The mound builders are named for the men who have written the fact of their existence in our soil but have left us no other records, are named for a race older than the Aztecs and coeval with the builders of the Toltec temples. In all the valleys of the Mississippi and its tributaries, we find an abundance of artificial mounds and other elevations of the origin of which the Indians knew no more than we do. Their traditions did not reach back so far. Accustomed as we have seen to the thought of primeval forests and wide, fallow prairies in all this region, thinly inhabited by nomadic tribes of the savages disputing the title to the soil with the fierce panther and the howling wolf, we can hardly realize that, ages ago, a dense agricultural population filled our borders, cultivating their farms, building substantial dwellings and lofty temples, establishing governments, and enacting laws, holding commercial relations with different parts of the continent, but that the country was so inhabited there could be no little doubt, in view of the manifold evidences which have survived the waves and weathers of time. In the state of Ohio alone, it has been estimated that there are more than 10,000 artificial mounds and terraces, and more than 1,500 earthwork enclosures, which have stood through the lapse of ages. Ages, not decades, not centuries, but ages of time. Their erection must have involved vast and continued labor and could only have been possible in a land like Mesopotamia or Egypt of great agricultural resources, where there were so many toiling hands. There were many mouths to be fed, and to supply the enormous demand, there must have been other workers, producers, tillers of the soil, maples and beeches, tough and hickories, and giant oaks. The green-robed senators of mighty woods did not always darken their face of Ohio, as in the days of the Indian hunters, but long, long before the red men had found their way from the far northwest. Grain, golden as the sunlight which ripened, it was waving over myriads of our fields. Where there was grain, there was granaries, and where the builders of the terraced mounds toiled day by day, they were bearing, buying, and selling, and there were 100 trades and employments which men have ever found in inevitable concomitants of civilized society. But let me take just one moment. It's about, like money's buying and selling. It was trading, it was bartering. It was more of a civilization, I would think, again, we get into conjecture now, of taking care of each other. They all knew they was part of nature. They all knew what was up. They took care of each other. Do you say that no man can know all this? That we have no data by the aid of which we can gain such a telescopic vision through such a vast distance of time? I reply to you that a chain of circumstances unbroken is sometimes the most convincing of testimony, and the facts are so numerous and so connected which evidence the existence of a dense agricultural population inhabiting in prehistoric times the country which is now our own, that the coolest-brained skeptics of science have surrendered all doubt and have allowed their imaginations to fill the vivid details of the pictures in which they have found readily outlined in their hands. We have long familiarized ourselves with the idea of ruined civilizations in Peru and Central America, but have you thought that a like civilization in the same age built the mounds and fortifications along the riverbanks of the Sandusky, the Huron, and the Vermilion? Have you realized that some of the soil-stained and crumbling human bones which we have unearthed are the bones of men and women who may have pleasant homes in Ohio before Solomon was born? Have you realized that evidences of their enlightenment, drawn from the character of the work which they wrought? One of the most painstaking and critical of delvers in ancient lore tells us that some of the pottery and wrought ornaments of the mound builders is equal in finish and beauty to the finest manufactured by the ancient Peruvians. That they constructed artificial ponds like the aguadas in Central America, and that they used sun-dried brick, especially at the south, where walls of this material have been discovered supporting some of the mounds and embankments. Among the works of art found in the mounds are finely wrought ornaments and implements of copper, silver, obsidian, and porphyry. There are axes of copper, single-edged and double-edged, and adzes, chisels, drills, engravers, lancehead, knives, bracelets, pendants, beads, and other ornaments of the same metal and silver or bone. Mica from the Alleghanies and shells from the Gulf of Mexico. Some of the articles of the stone, and especially of the porphyry, show such elaborate carving and could only be executed with keen-edged tools of the hardest material. The mound builders, unlike the Central Americas, left no paintings from which we might learn what fashions and dress prevailed in their generation, but they did not clothe themselves wholly, if at all, in the skins of wild animals, for it has been discovered that among their arts was that of making cloth. So even in this time they was making cloth. They was so skilled in their artistry and their knowledge and wisdom. They didn't have to use animal skins, man. not the cloth of the Sandwich Islands are made of macerated bark, nor that of the lake dwelling of the Switzerland, matted sheets of vegetable fiber, but regularly spun and woven cloth having a warp and woof. They had mines, these mound builders, mines of mica in North Carolina and copper in the Lake Superior regions, and the products of both have been found in the mounds many hundreds of miles from the places whence they were taken. The possession of such products evidences the enterprising commerce of the age. The copper mines along the Lake Superior shores are of great extent, and when we consider that there are no mounds, house foundations, or other indications that the miners had a fixed residence where they did their work, but must have gone hundreds of miles in armies of laborers to operate the mines in the summer months. When we consider the supplies of food necessary to be provided for their sustenance, we realize that they belong to a race of people far different from their red-skinned successors, who led comparatively aimless lives, substituting mainly on game and fish. Not to be disrespectful. As they ventured into the north in search of copper, so they brought other commodities and articles from far distant regions. I have been shown an ornament of finely polished stone which was taken from one of the mounds. It was of a greenish color, and its material is a fine-grained ribbon-marked siliceous slate. Ornaments and implements of the same material have been found, I learn, widely scattered through the country of the mound builders, but the stone, which is of metamorphic origin, is not found in its natural bed anywhere in the Mississippi Valley, unless it be at its very edge. Ohio and Wisconsin are not mountainous regions, but the mounds of both states have been found arrowheads and obsidian, which is a volcanic mineral and was probably brought to Mexico. Now back up. We got big volcanoes here. Don't let them fool you. Other manufactured articles might be named abundant in the mountains, the materials of which were foreign to the Mississippi Valley, but enough has been said to make manifest the fact that the mound builders were not a solitary people, but had friendly commercial relations with distant empires. Of all the memories of these strange people, the most wonderful are those earthworks which have been given their name, the mounds. They are scattered all over the whole of Mississippi Valley, varying somewhat in their details, but having so many features in common as to indicate their common origin. These earthworks are of several classes. Some of them are lofty elevations, some low truncated pyramids, and some enclosures often of great extent in the form of a circle, the square, the rhomb, and the octagon, the lines of which have been drawn with geometrical accuracy. Again, very intelligent. Okay, so we're not going to go through the Miamisburg here. Okay. As the hordes of the fierce Goths and Vandals and Huns swept and desolated classic Italy. What are we talking about here? What are we talking about here? Talking about the Tartars. So many of these nameless barbarians of North America who raised no mounds and built no temples have swept their more enlightened but less warlike neighbors from the valley of the Mississippi to the Sierras of Mexico and the forests of the Yucatan. See there? Ocoseans. How many centuries ago did these builders of mounds, these miners of copper and mica, these fashioners of 100 curious things, whose names and uses we know not, abandon all their works and vanish from the fertile valleys of the Mississippi and its tributaries? Again, you can't just say it's people coming down and attacking them. We know that we had hella catastrophes of volcanoes and ice. They was moving too, okay? When the French began to found settlements in Canada, which was nearly a score in years before the landing of the Pilgrims, all the country along the lakes, north and south, was inhabited by Indian tribes. When De Soto, almost a century earlier, invaded Florida, traversed the regions which are now the southern states of the Union, and discovered and crossed the Mississippi, he found only savages. There was then, as now, no sign of that civilization which had built the mounds, save in its ruins. So far as is known, among all the memories of the red man handed down from generation to generation, not the faintest trace of a tradition was preserved concerning the mound builders. That's my problem. That's my problem. Why is people saying that the Indians built the mounds? That's not right. The memory of them had probably been lost centuries before the white man came, and to the red men as to us, the ruins which remained were ever unsolved enigmas, time-worn antiquaries. Now, I might have to get corrected, and maybe I should reach out to some of my people that know a little bit more than me. But where I'm at right now, the Indians didn't build these mounds. Finding no measure of the age of the mounds in Indian traditions, we must study the ruins themselves. We shall find growing upon them mighty forest trees whose trunks, when cut, reveal 800 years of annual growth. 800 years. So the trees that they find in these mounds when they're cutting, they got 800 years of annual growth, and which were doubtless the successors of other trees which had gone to decay before, or for abandoned, and wastelands are not covered at all once with force. Opening the soil with the plowshare, we shall find near the surface the well-preserved skeletons of Indians, for the red men often used the mounds as burial places. But going deeper with spade and shovel, working to the bottom in the center of the mounds, we shall disclose skulls, darkly stained, broken, and crumbling, the remains of mound builders. The ground around them is dry and compact, a circumstance favorable to the preservation, and yet we shall rarely find the skull or skeleton of a true mound builder, which will not fall to pieces at the slightest touch. So even though they are in soil that is amazing at preserving, they're so old they turn to dust. Doubtless there are other conditions than moisture unfavorable to the preservation of such remains, but we cannot but feel that these of the mound builders are very ancient. When we learn that on the other side of the ocean, skeletons known to be nearly 2,000 years old have been taken from humid earth in burial places, still undecayed and unbroken. We must count the time not by years but by centuries, since the untrodden grass grew on the flat summits of the mountains and the wooden edifices began to molder under the summer rains and winter force. Whence came the mound builders and whither did they go? Neither question can be answered with certainty, but we are not without a glimmer of light on the subject. I have given reasons for supposing that their northern frontier was along the southern shores of the lakes, and that these lakes was very bigger than what they are now, y'all. Way bigger than what they are now, y'all. Fortifications grow less frequent and finally disappear. Meantime, the evidences of dense population increase, and everywhere are indications of a connection with the inhabitants of Central America and Mexico. So right here, we have some good distinction. There have been noticed among our North American Indian subtribes as the Mandans of the Northwest and the Natchez of Mississippi, differing widely from the Indians in general and having many characteristics and customs believed to have belonged to the mound builders. Thus far, I have been speaking of a race which left no written record, and I have called it by the name which its works have bestowed upon it. Has it another name? And is there aught in any written chronicle concerning it? I have already intimated that at the time of the Spanish conquest, the zeal of the white priests caused the destruction of many writings in the strange characters of the Nahuatlecas and Toltecs. But some records survived the destroying fires of fanaticism, and learned men have studied to decipher them. Not all the puzzling alphabets, for there were more than one, yielded to their industry, but enough was read to throw light on American history for centuries before the memorable year of 1492 when Columbus came. Here we go, my boy. But Arzer de Bourg, an industrious and successful investigator, furnishes this information. Now check it. Do you see how many people are referring over to Arzer de Bourg? This guy is so important, everybody's quoting him. In all of their books, they quote him. Why? Because he's the person who's translating this. That's why it's so important for anybody watching this now and hearing this. You gotta get into my Origins of Civilization series. Previous to the history of the Toltec, and this is from Arzer de Bourg. Previous to the history of the Toltec domination in Mexico, we notice in the annals of the country two facts of great importance, but equally obscure in their details. First, the tradition concerning the landing of a foreign race conducted by an illustrious personages. And when they mean foreign, that could mean from Florida, bruh. It could mean from within, you know what I'm saying? It's not far. Like they try to make it be out. Who came from the eastern country, Florida, Cuba. And second, the existence of an ancient empire known as Hue Hue Tlapalan, from which the Toltecs or Nahuas came to Mexico. Okay? Hue Hue Tlapalan, an ancient empire whence the Toltecs came to Mexico. You see how big they got? You got the exclamation mark. Where was this Hue Hue Tlapalan with the question mark? Okay, let's go. Let's see what they got to say. Let us sit further at the feet of these patient students of the old annals and hear what they shall say to us. Arzer de Bourg believes that the empire so named was the country of the mound builders in the Mississippi and Ohio valleys. According to the native books, it was somewhere in the northwest, and it is said that some of the Toltecs came by land and some by sea. Another investigator skilled in the old books and traditions confirms the statement as to the direction of the ancient Toltec Empire from Mexico, and he gives additional details as to the toilsome migration. Another account speaks of the numerous body of people with 20 chiefs who came from the northeast to the Tampico River and settled at Panuco. Torquemada Mada found a record which describes these people as of fine appearance, industrious, orderly, and intelligent workers of metals and skillful artistries and lapidaries. The accounts are uniform in describing the coming of the Toltecs as from the northeast by land and water in different bodies. It would seem that a part of them embarked at some point on the Gulf Coast and finished their journey by water, while others passed around by land through Texas. Shout out to all my Texans out there. I'm Dallas 214. What's up? 75496. Let's get it, baby. Cabrera says that the simple name of this northeastern empire was Tlapalan, but it was called Hue Hue, old, to distinguish it from the 3 other Tlapalans afterwards founded in their kingdom. In some of these old records, another fact is related. It is said that Hue Hue Tlapalan was successfully invaded by Chichimex. Savagery, which seems a generic word, like the Greek barbaroi, applying to all the barbarian nations in the land, and that after a terrible struggle of 13 years, the Toltecs were forced to abandon their country under the guidance of the 2 chiefs. They reached a region near the sea called Tlapalan Canco, where they sojourned for several years. Finally, they migrated to Mexico, whence they built a town called Tulancingo, and afterwards the city of Tulan, which became their kingdom's capital. In view of the foregoing facts and the hoary records which I have cited, which are but a part of the ancient literature preserved bearing on the same interesting subject, the identity of the Toltecs of Hue Hue Tlapalan with our mound builders is, at least, highly probable. Hue Hue Tlapalan, old. We found no records in the mounds to tell us when the migration to the south took place. Shall we derive any greater knowledge as to the dates from a study of these writings in the dead Nahuatl and Toltec tongues? Now, I'm gonna tell you like this, man. I really feel like them Smithsonians came through and really took a lot. I mean, just look at the aspect, the Hanukkah mounds, with the square, the compass, the oil-burning lamp, and the Hebrew menorah. Okay, why would they destroy that? I'm sure that they had a good amount of information that they could find in there. That was a holy place. Big time holy. That's why they destroyed it, because it showed that America is the true old world, the land of the Bible. There is nothing more abstract than time, and in the absence of all astronomical knowledge, nothing harder to measure. The Aztecs of Montezuma's time were far behind their predecessors in civilization. Did you hear me? Did you hear them? They knew that then at this time, so why ain't we understanding it now? The Aztecs of Montezuma's time were far behind their predecessors in civilization. But even they had some astronomical science and, based upon it, a correct measure of the year. But again, what did we find out again? I'll mention it one more time. The sages came to Hue Hue Tlapalan to make the time, to correct the calendar, and based upon a correct measure of the year. In that measure, there were 18 months of 20 days each, but this making only 360 days, 5 supplementary ones were added, and in every fourth year, another, just as we fill up our measure with a leap year. And the chronology of these Aztecs years were grouped in periods, and their historical dates are computed by means of such groups. The oldest date in their chronicles, which has been computed with accuracy, carries us back 955 years before Christ. The event recorded as of this date was one which took place long after the coming of the Toltecs from Hue Hue Tlapalan. So that if the history and the chronology are true, we are enabled to say that our Ohio mounds were abandoned to the barbarian Chichimex more than 1,000 years before the Christian era. America is the true old world. Before such probabilities as these, we stand in awe. We have thought that to find the works of real antiquity, we must traverse the ocean. But here, in our very midst, we, perchance, have ruins older than the ruins of Rome, older than the Temple of Solomon, the grass-grown foundations of buildings erected more than a century before Elijah prophesied in Palestine and Homer sang in Greece. America is the true old world. Still, we are only in the afternoon of American history. Do you hear him? We have not gone back to the noontide when the mound builders were building and painters and sculptors of the South were doing their imperishable work. We have hardly approached the early morning when the Toltec race, traveling northward, found a home in the Mississippi Valley. And we know, not how far from the first gray dawn of tradition, the time when the ancestors of the Toltec mound and temple builders began to inhabit America. We may not have a vision clear enough to pierce such profound depths of the past, but perhaps in an examination of other relics and traditions which have been rescued from oblivion, we shall find a beam of sunlight to dispel some of the mists which obscure the remotest antiquity. He didn't say like the remotest of antiquity in America. He said the remotest of all antiquity. The Coahuas were the people who were inhabiting Central America when the Toltecs came from the north. But generations before that event, the Toltecs must have gone northward, and it is probable that both these races, with the Aztecs and other Nahuatlacas, were but branches of one great family inhabiting the central part of this double continent from an age dating back of all history, the true Fertile Crescent. The various offshoots of this family never extended their settlements much further to the Great Lakes of the north and to the boundaries of Chile and South America. We have found that the mound builders were at least a semi-civilized people. But it is probable that as compared to the nations inhabiting the regions to the south, they were colonists and provincials. Yup. See what I'm saying? Their works built upon the mounds and terraces were mainly of perishable wood, but the ancient nations of the tropical and subtropical regions of the continent had structures and images of stone imperishable as the earth foundations on which they were reared. There must be 1,000 treasures of ancient skill as yet undiscovered, lying hid in the dark and matted forests of Central America, where hardly a ray of sunlight can enter. Those which have been found and described are in the margin of these well-nigh impenetrable forests, and the work of finding and examining even them was attended with difficulties almost insuperable. Yeah. Vague stories of the wealth of ruins yet undiscovered have been brought by Indian hunters who have a superstitious reverence for these moss covered in crumbling monuments of a time forgotten. And when they talk about the wealth of the ruins, I mean, you can look up, I believe it's part 3 of America's The True World on my channel here, where we're going through Father Crespi and all of the works that were, I mean, his collection was beyond. And what they do, they came and stole it from him and took it all. They had to hide it. Some of the ruins which have been described are immense pyramidal foundations with massive stone temples elaborately decorated with painting and sculpture. Yep, we know this. Let's get to the info. Where you at? What you got going on? The palace of the ancient city of Palenque has floors of cement, as hard, says one explorer, as the best seen in Roman baths and cisterns. So who'd they learn it from? We saw before us a large building richly ornamented with stuccoed figures on pilasters, curious and elegant trees growing close to it and their branches entering the doors, the style of effective structure and ornament unique, extraordinary, and mournful in beauty. Can it be that in the ages so remote that we cannot measure the distance which separates them from us, a circle of civilization encompassed the world, and that on the American continent 2 currents of life from the other hemisphere meet and blend? From the other hemisphere? No, sir. No, sir. One from the east and the other from the west? No, sir. Just as today the Caucasian race is meeting the Mongolian and blending with it. Oh, watch out. There are wondrous ruins of an extinct civilization in the Malayan archipelago. And upon many of the islands of the Pacific, and some investigators have had theories as to the derivation of the ancient Americans which look to these islands in the Asiatic coast. See, the other way around. We, America, spread out. The first to rise from the depths of the ocean, Louis Agassiz, Harvard professor, geologist. Other theorists have found an ancestry for them in the old Phoenicians, and others still in the lost tribes of Israel. But there are difficulties in the way of all these theories, and the weight of opinion among men learned in the subject seems to be that of the American civilization was an original one. Thank you, underived from that of any race in the other hemisphere. Thank you! America is the true old world. This opinion may be better founded one, but if none of the Oriental blood flowed in American veins, what do you mean? What do you mean? They came from here too. Let us not conclude too hastily that there never before now was a time when the two hemispheres were well known to each other and bought and sold in each other's markets. There are coincidences in their relics and their religions and their traditions and habits of life which are unaccountable upon any other hypothesis than that the time was when the wide oceans was no barrier to their free intercourse. So, let's try this real quick. It says, step by step we have grouped our way by the dim light of traditions, fragmentary records, and broken ruins through eras of the buried past. We have sought acquaintance with the Toltec builders of mounds and temples, the Peruvian architects of the massive works at whose crumbling remains we have stood with awe. We have learned that the America of the past is one whose history is worth the reading, for it is an America of enlightened nations. Is there no step further which we may yet take to a still sublimer past? Take it with me, and the mystery of Atlantis is reached. Atlantis, a legend old as time, beautiful as a poem and fascinating with the wildest romance. Your conjecture. You come through and make up all these other stories on what you want to believe Atlantis is. But this is Atlantis. It was the original. It was the start of civilization. A legend which may be false, but which may be true. It's false in what they saying, what they want to believe Atlantis was. For ages, men believed it. Again, for ages, it was rejected by the learned as a pure myth. Why? Because they don't want America to be the true world. That's why. They can't have it be that way. Because if they have it be that way, they lose all the power of thinking that everything transpired in the old world there. Let me repeat to you the story recorded by Plato in his Timaeus as communicated to Solon by the Egyptian priest. Translated, it runs as follows. Among the great deeds of Athens, of which recollections are preserved in our books, there is one which should be placed above all others. Our books tell that the Athenians destroyed an army which came across the Atlantic Sea and insolently invaded Europe and Asia. For this sea was then navigable, and beyond the strait where you place the Pillars of Hercules, the references of the Strait of Gibraltar, there was an island larger than Asia and Libya combined. The priest is speaking of Asia Minor, and that part of Africa then known. From this island, one could easily pass to other islands, and from these to the continent which lies around the interior sea. The sea on this side of the strait, the Mediterranean, of which we speak, resembles a harbor with a narrow entrance, the Gulf, but there is a genuine sea, and the land which surrounds it is a veritable continent. The Gulf, baby. In the island of Atlantis reigned 3 kings with great and marvelous power. They had under their dominion the whole of Atlantis, America, several other islands, and some parts of the continent. At one time their power extended to Libya, into Europe, as far as Tyrrhenia. In uniting the whole force, they sought to destroy our countries at a blow. But their defeat stopped the invasion and gave the entire independence to all the countries to this side of the Pillars of Hercules. How many times have we read this? Do you get it? Such as the legend as told by Plato would find some confirmation in the words of the classic writers. The Athenians had traditions concerning the people from Atlantis before Solon visited Egypt. Proclus mentions islands in the exterior sea beyond the Pillars of Hercules and says that in one of them the inhabitants preserved the memory of Atlantis, an extremely large island, America, which for a long time held dominion over all the islands of the Atlantic Ocean. Plutarch, corroborating Plato, says in his Life of Solon that when the latter was in Egypt, he conferred with the priests and learned them from the story of Atlantis. We already know all this. Could we but decipher all of the most ancient manuscripts of America, several of which even now lie neglected in libraries and private collections of Europe, what corroboration might we not find in this romantic legend? But has the New World yet given no light? Professor de Berberg, from whose writings I have already quoted. See, everybody quotes him, because he's the foundation of understanding. A learned Frenchman, whose investigations are recognized by all students of American ancient lore as one of the utmost importance by the translation of a Toltecan work called the Teomoxli, has given us a narrative of a cataclysm of the Antilles. There it goes. Here we go. Talking about the volcanoes down near the Gulf region, our Mediterranean. Okay? Yeah. Where we're talking about the volcanoes, the 7 that became 8, has given us a narrative of the cataclysm of the Antilles in George Catlin in his work lately published in London entitled The Lifted and Subsidized Rocks of America. Maybe we need to look into that one. Refers to traditions of some of the Indian tribes concerning such convulsions of nature. Volcanoes. The more southern tribes say that the water came in mountain waves from the east, and of myriads of people who endeavored to escape to the high grounds further west, according to some tradition, 1 man only, by others 2, and by still others 7. When we talk about 7, who we talking about? Ixtlioxochitl and the 7 families succeeded in reaching places of safety. So what they talking about? Huge cataclysm happened in our region in the Gulf of Mexico that wiped out the civilizations. They didn't go nowhere. It was a cataclysm. It wasn't people coming down here and killing them. It was the cataclysm of the earth that sunk everything. This is Atlantis. The tribes in Central America and Mexico, in Venezuela and in British Dutch Guyana, distinctly remember 3 cataclysms, one by water, one by fire, and the third by the winds. The tribes near the vicinity of the terrible conversions were cognizant of the whole effects of the fire and winds, when the remote tribes were sensible only of the flood of waters which went to the base of the mountains. Foster, in his prehistoric races, might have to dive into this one too if we haven't so far, speaking of some of these traditions, uses the words, quote, from amidst the thunder and the flames that came out of the sea whilst mountains were sinking and rising, the terror-stricken inhabitants sought every expedient of safety. Wake up, my people. Some fled to the mountains and some launched their rafts and canoes upon the turbulent waters, trusting that a favorable current would land them upon a hospitable shore, and thus, in this elemental strife, this ancient civilized people became widely dispersed. Now check it. I'm gonna hit you with something real quick. Curramayo today, on October the 27th, dropped a 4-hour drop in relation to looking at a lot of the pre-Columbian artifacts. A lot of them was Negro, y'all. A lot of them was Negro. Okay? You got a pyramid we just went through recently under at least 8,000 years of strata. Okay? That's how many layers. We ain't talking about no carbon dating. We talking about geological dating based off of the strata. Now what does that make you conclude? Possibly that a lot of, you're talking about all these people, got wiped out. Where'd the remnants of those people go? It is further said that by Foster that the festival of Izcalli, which word, from its form, I judge to belong to the Nahuatl or Toltec language, was instituted to commemorate this terrible calamity, in which festival, princes, and people humbled themselves before the divinity and besought him not to renew the frightful convulsions. Of course, have we ever in our lifetime seen anything as dramatic as what they went through? Nor were they prepared for such catastrophes in any manner. In the midst of such sublime acts of nature as have been suggested rather than described, while hurricanes and earthquakes, floods, and volcanic fires combine to make the occasion the most terrible one that we can imagine, an area, it is claimed larger than that of France, became engulfed, including the Lesser Antilles, the extensive banks at their eastern base, which at that date were vast and fertile plains, the peninsulas of Yucatan, Honduras, and Guatemala, and the great estuaries of the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico. When we was talking about a lot of that information today in Carameo's video, a lot of it was in Guatemala, which was completely demolished. The theory is that the splendid cities of Palenque and Uxmal were submerged with their inhabitants. Hello? If I had not been saying this throughout this whole thing, I ain't read this yet. I'm going through this for the first time. I wasn't even supposed to read this far. I was just supposed to touch base on Hue Hue Tlapalan. And that, in after years, the waters subsided, leaving dry but empty and desolate the cities whose ruins modern travelers have portrayed in glowing worlds. If the story of Atlantis is true, how many more buried cities still lie under the oozy sediment of the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean Sea, or even the wide Atlantic itself? We may never hope to know. Oh, we know. We've been there. Y'all ain't looked into the ancient cities underneath the water in the Gulf of Mexico with those large stones? Go look it up. Go look at ancient cities in the Gulf of Mexico underwater. Go look it up. We may never hope to know. Oh, we know. Unless an upheaval of the ocean bottom shall sometime restore the ancient Atlantis as it was ages before the time of Plato. We don't want that. We got scuba divers. We'll take care of it. Please don't upload. Please, we don't want no more upheavals. Please, please. What light does the geological science of the 19th century throw upon the Atlantean mystery? I think that I may answer that at least it does not prove its falsity if it does not demonstrate its truth. Geologists recognize such great catastrophes in nature as that described to the lawgiver of Athens by the Egyptian priest. To be sure, they place them further back in time than the annals of man have reached. But are they not drifting every day to the conclusion that we have been making too short a measure for the age of man on the world? Thank you. Thank you. How far back does man really go in the world? Ages upon ages. Why do you think the Mayans had the ages set at 25,000 years, man? Come on, dude. And after all, who can say just how long before our ancestors knew America that mighty effort of nature was made by which the rocky Sierras of Mexico and Central America were uplifted? Thank you. They was before the rocky Sierras were uplifted and the lofty peaks of the Andes were reared to their place among the clouds. Thank you. Before the Andes reared themselves up to the clouds. We've already spoken of this. Certain it is that such a convulsion came, though we know neither the day nor the hour, and we may well believe that at the time when such a change was wrought in the earth's crust along one edge of the American continent, a corresponding change was wrought along the other. That if there was an upheaval on one side, there was a sinking on the other. Overstand that. That if there was a sinking here, there was a rising in another. Else the world might have lost her balance. Hey man, we talking about flat plains over here. I don't know about no round ball. In Smith's Natural History of the Human Species, I find suggested such a disturbance in the superficies of the Earth's crust, extending east and west, from Barbados to Veracruz, and he adds that it may not be remote in date from the submersion of Atlantis on the African coast. Always what they do is they mention this boy here. Brazier de Bourg cites some authorities to support the theory of a submerged continent, of which the theory he himself an earnest advocate. His first quotation is from Moria de Sainte-Marie, who wrote as follows in a work published in 1796. So, before I read this, we know that the Gulf of Mexico sank from crazy convulsions because we have an ancient civilization of works in the Gulf of Mexico below the water. Very simple. It's not hard, yo. Quote, there are those who, in examining the map of America, do not continue themselves to thinking, with the French Pliny, that the innumerable islands situated from the mouth of the Orinoco to the Bahama Channel Islands, which include several Grenadines, not always visible in very high tides or great agitations of the sea, should be considered as summits of the vast mountains whose bases and sides are covered with water, but who go farther, and suppose these islands to be the tops of the most elevated of the chain of mountains which crowned a portion of the continent whose submersion has produced the Gulf of Mexico. Do you understand what I just said? The islands are the tops of mountain peaks that were submerged in the cataclysm. But to sustain this opinion, it must be added that another vast surface of land, which united the islands of the to the continent from Yucatan to the mouth of the Orinoco, was submerged in the same way, and also a third surface which connected them from the peninsula of Florida with whatever land may have constituted the northern termination, for we cannot imagine that these mountains whose summits appear above the water stood on the terminating line of the continent. Dieberberg cites also the authority of Charles Martin, who says, quote, now, hydrography, geology, and botany agree in teaching us that the Azores, the Canaries, and the Madeira are the remains of a great continent which formerly united Europe to North America. A fact of great importance in its bearing on the question of the existence or non-existence of Atlantis is a feature of the geology of England. Immediately below its chalk and green sands is a fluvial or freshwater deposit called the Wealden, about 200 miles square, in some places 2,000 feet in depth. It is a phenomenon which clearly points to the existence in that locality at some time of a large supply of fresh water, such as might be supposed to have drained a continent or a large island, containing within it a lofty chain of mountains. Says Anthon in his classical dictionary, quote, if geology can furnish us facts as these, it may surely be pardonable in us to linger with something of fond belief around the legend of Atlantis, a legend that could hardly be mere offspring of a poetic imagination, but must have had some foundation in truth. Atlantis is America! As eminent as geologist as Sir Charles Lyell, speaking of this same English formation, uses this language, quote, if it be asked where the continent was placed from the ruins of which the Wealdenstraten were derived, and by the drainage of which a great river was fed, we are half tempted to speculate on the former existence of the Atlantis of Plato, the story of the submergence of an ancient continent, however fabulous in history, must have been true again and again as a geological event, unquote. Finally, I quote the following from The World Before the Deluge by Louis Figuier. It appears that just as the northern part of the Scandinavian continent is now rising, and while the middle part of South Stockholm remains unmoved, the southern extremity in Scania is sinking, or at least has sunk, within the historic period, from which Lyell argues that there may have been a slow upheaval in one region while the adjoining one was stationary or in process of submerging. Shall we go on? Shall we go on? We find then that this testimony of the tradition of geologic science are not inharmonious. If they do not echo the strange Egyptian tale, they do not gainsay it or agree with it, okay? Even if we had no further testimony and corroboration, we might hesitate to class the legend among the fables of ancient mythology. But there is a fact which startles one in the gleam of light which it throws upon the mystery, and makes us almost believe that we have demonstrated the legend of Atlantis to be not a poetical myth, but a sober chapter of true history here in America. This fact is found in a coincidence of names, which, if it be no more than a coincidence, is one of the most marvelous accidents in the world's annals. Nothing, says Bancroft, is so indelible as speech. Sounds that in ages of unknown antiquity were spoken among the nations of Hindustan or Bharat still live in their significancy in the language which we daily utter. Unquote. Paul Grave echoes the same sentiment. Quote, language adheres to the soil when the lips which spoke it are resolved into dust. Mountains repeat and rivers murmur the voices of nations denationalized or extirpated in their own land, unquote. It amazes me to think that I am speaking to you Sanskrit words, the words of that dead language, which is held sacred by the Brahmins of India. But it amazes me no less to learn that a little group of words spoken in ages back, of all the dates of history, may have remained in the mouths of men to testify to the existence, in those remote times, of a fair and fertile land which is buried now far below the tides of the stormy Atlantic. The name Atlantis, given to the lost land in mid-ocean, and the name Atlas, bestowed upon a mountain range in the northwest coast of Africa, have no satisfactory etymology in any language known to Europe. They are not Greek, although given to us by the Greeks. Indeed, Baburk says that they cannot be referred to any known language of the Old World. The names were frequent in the books of classic writers of Greece and Rome centuries before the Christian era, and we already talked about this well more than 1,000 years. From what foreign land and strange clime came they to mingle with the Euphoric Greek and the Soronist Latin? Study with me for a moment the radical sounds of the American dead language, the Nahuatl. The very name of the language ends with the peculiar combination of the letters with which Atlantis and Atlas begin. You can read no book concerning the ancient people of Central America and Mexico without remarking how, in their languages, words abound containing the syllabic forms tla, tli, atl, itl, and etl. We have an illustration of the use of one of these forms in Tlapalan, the name of the country northeast of Mexico, America, North America. We have another in the word Popocatépetl, the name of a volcano. In the Nahuatl tongue, the radical atl has various meanings, one of them being water and another war. The word Atlan signifies on the border of or amid the water. What word more appropriate than Atlan for an island or a continent against all whose sides the ocean surged? And what more natural than the growth under the inflections of Eastern languages from Atlan to Atlantis? When Columbus uprolled the curtain which hid America from European eyes at the entrance of the Gulf of Uraba in Darien, was a city which, in later years, has shrunk to the condition of an insignificant pueblo. It is called now Akla, but when first known, it bore the name Atlan. There is another word, Atlakas, Atlax, Atlakasa, meaning to hurl or dart from the water, a verb having in one of its tenses the form Atlas, a word from which the transition would be very slight to the name of the African mountains. The Nahuatl Lacas, who inhabited the Mexican plateau, had come to that country, according to their histories, from a place or region called Atlan. Its locality is unknown to us, and for many years it was believed to be somewhere north of Mexico and beyond the River Gila, but later investigations have made it probable that it was in an opposite direction. The sign which represented Atlan in hieroglyphic inscriptions was that of water, Atl, standing for Aztlan. And in one place this hieroglyph has been found associated with a pyramidal temple or teocalli, near which is represented a palm tree. This fact is held to point to a southern rather than a northern locality for the region whence the ancestors of the Aztecs migrated to Mexico. They came not many centuries before the Spanish conquest, but how long they had lived in Atlan, their history does not tell. Decades of centuries had passed away since Atlantis had sunk to be an ocean bed. Atlan was not Atlantis, but as pilgrims from England, driven by religious persecutions, founded a New England. As the Toltecs, defeated by fierce barbarian foes, left the old Tlapalan and founded new ones, so may the Atlantes, driven by the terrible forces of nature to abandon their native land, had founded new cities and kingdoms and bestowed upon them names which they were cherished reminders of a glorious past. We're gonna stop it here, y'all. We 2 hours in. We might continue this one on because I like what's being said. It's logical. It's overstanding. It's understanding. It's no more standing under the trained way in which we've been taught to think. Why you think they ain't teaching none of this in schools and colleges, bruh? Atlantis is the true old world. Yo, man, I appreciate y'all. If you made it this far, you a real one. I got to give a shout out straight out to my boy 432 Drop. That's the OG. Next shout out I'm going to give out to is Gary Mayo. What's up, my brother? You already know what's up, Professor. Next shout out I'm going to give to Old World, Florida. You know what's good. You talking about that true Fertile Crescent, baby. Another shout out I'm going to give to is my boy Analog. What's up, Ben? I see you, Benjamin. It's been a while since I talked to you. What's up, Ben? Let's talk, man. Either way, we're getting into it. We're stopping all the hijack. America is the true old world, y'all. Peace and blessings to you all. Allow Hawa.